Welcome into the ArtGibbs Sports Business Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. And here we are on the precipice of big-time football. NFL coming up, already some games being played, and it's a good time to be in America, right? Football season is always exciting. It's filled with hope for so many. And in this episode, it's gonna be kind of a piggyback on a previous episode that we did on the Jacksonville Jaguars and their potential in going to London and that kind of stuff. So I'll put a description to the previous episode below, but basically we talked a lot about, Urban Meyer going to Jacksonville, the fact that they're playing several games a year in London, the fact that the owner owns a soccer team in London and has built facilities in London and all of that kind of stuff. So we talk about that and what that might mean and what it might mean in terms of a relocation. At the time of doing that podcast, there was a shipyard project and the tax benefits for that were shot down at that time. Now we've got a new update where the city has put some money up for training facilities for the team. So I wanted to reopen this a little bit. Of course, the owner says he's committed to Jacksonville. The politicians say they're committed to Jacksonville. The NFL says they're committed to Jacksonville. Everybody says they're committed to Jacksonville. And here, this new $120 million training facility deal ostensibly pushes that forward. But this feels a bit like an inevitability. First they play no games in London, then they play one game in London, then they play two games in London, and of course, London is bigger than Jacksonville. London is not in the United States. Jacksonville is. It only feels like it's not in the United States. And of course, if they went to London, that would give the NFL a presence outside of America. So what happened? There's a $120 million deal, just got approved. Let's call it a real estate deal for the training facilities. The city will take out $60 million in bonds. Allegedly, the Jaguars will pay for the remainder. Again, this is one of those things where you might be wondering here about tax abatement and why a highly profitable NFL franchise would need tax abatement. And you wouldn't be alone in that sense. But the reality is that it's less about need and it's more about can. The local politicians can sell it to their constituents. Look at this tax revenue we're going to get. Look at the inflation in real estate prices we're going to get. Look at the inflation in milk and eggs and everything we're going to get if we have this NFL team here. And if we don't have this NFL team here, we're not going to have any of that. They can sell that to their constituents. And franchises know that. Franchises know that there is benefit to the city, to the politicians, to the real estate prices. And so they push. And they know that other cities will offer tax abatement to get them there. So they push in their current city. And if they want to go to a new city, they're looking at a new city, they'll reach out to the new city politicians reach out to them, et cetera, et cetera. And they know that they can go to their current city and say, hey, look, this other city's offering something more. Maybe we'll go to this other city if you don't come up with something more. And of course, to move from city to city, there has to be a vote. Majority of the owners have to approve it. But if they're moving to a bigger market, bigger TV dollars, et cetera, that's that's a larger pie for everybody involved, and most likely that will be approved. Now, this happens all the time. Not all the time, but there's been several franchises that have moved, so it does happen. But this, though, feels especially interesting because of the huge imbalance, right? It's Jacksonville and it's London. It's London and it's Jacksonville. Even when the San Diego Chargers moved from, large and beautiful San Diego to large and beautiful Los Angeles, Jerry Jones is outside of the restaurant after a few glasses of wine saying Los Angeles, Los Angeles. Think about what the image is that Los Angeles evokes. And that's just moving from up the road from San Diego, another large city, another beautiful city, moving up the road to LA. This is to London, from Jacksonville to London. London's a large market, a world-renowned city, and Jacksonville is Jacksonville. So there's this imbalance, and you can ask about it, but they're going to say all the right things. Any reporter, any team owner, any team player, any politician, there's nothing to see here, right? What is there to see here? You ask us about London, there's nothing to see here. It's just London. We We play 17 games this year. We have preseason games, and we're playing 2 games in London? Well, of course, it's not including preseason. It's not any away games. These are home games that are given up. They go play in London that are being taken away. So all of this tax revenue and all of these game day revenue and all of these ticket riders that they might give to help pay for these stadiums are cut drastically. So you could ask, and all the team owners and the players and the politicians, they'll all say the right things, right? We're committed to Jacksonville. This is what we're doing. This is going to happen. We're going to invest here. We're staying here. Most of our games are here. Well, of course, to even lose 1 game in the season, 2 games, those kinds of things, that's big. And of course, the team owner has a connection in London, et cetera, et cetera. This has all been reported on. But of course, it's in some ways the elephant in the room. The NFL is a major, major sport in the United States. It's the king of sports in the United States. And they'll all say the right things. And they're all saying the right things. But there's a big imbalance here. And it at least must be noted that there feels like some level of inevitability to some degree, maybe a splitting of the games, half and half, something like that. But the NFL is totally dominant in the United States. Huge numbers. They do huge numbers. As Colin Cowherd mentioned, the best franchises in the NFL are not even doing that well, and they're still doing huge numbers. The ratings are it's almost the environment in which all of these other sports compete. The NFL is king in terms of ratings, in terms of dollars, by several multiple, even against things like Formula One and NASCAR several years ago. NFL is still far surpasses that in terms of TV numbers, ratings, just through the roof. But it's not big worldwide. It's not big outside of the United States. It's not as big. So that's why there's been this outreach, these consistent London games. And again, if a team like Jacksonville moved to London for half their games, most likely there would be increased TV dollars for the NFL. And you can say not that they need it, but again, the team owners don't need the tax breaks, but they'll get them if it works. And adding London could work for the NFL TV dollars and work for the NFL ratings. And of course, this is not New York we're talking about. This is not LA we're talking about. This is not Miami we're talking about. This is Jacksonville. This is this smaller market team that does not have a huge history, and it's effectively flirting with, competing with, engaging with London, which is, of course, the equivalent of London, Paris, Tokyo, New York. It seems a bit dangerous, at least for the people of Jacksonville. Anyway, so let's look a little bit at this deal. So again, the city's going to issue some bonds. Now, when they do this, since it's illegal to sort of give tax breaks just based on, I'm going to give this person a tax break or that person a tax break, they do put the land, most likely the ownership of the facility, in some entity that the city owns or controls. So, for instance, of course, Jacksonville does rent the stadium that they're in from the city of Jacksonville. That's the owner on the tax records. And then, for instance, in Nashville, Tennessee Titans Stadium is actually owned by the Metro Government SP Sports Authority. So again, there were tax breaks given, but effectively they were given in the city to the city, right? The city owns the land and the stadium. But it's but it's not that clear cut, right? There's a symbiotic relationship. If the NFL franchise is not there, that stadium's not going to do as well. That stadium's not going to be worth near as much. Probably be cut by a third of what it was originally worth, or a sixth if there's no NFL team, depending on where the stadium's located. Stadium like Foxborough, now that's a little different setup, but an example, a stadium further outside of the city, not going to be worth much. Obviously, the land in Nashville that the stadium's on would have some real value, but not as much as having an NFL team play there. So, although it's put into that separate legal entity, it's a bit of a symbiotic relationship. So that's happening. $120 million training facilities, Of course, they talk about Vanderbilt football putting in $300 million, and that's not going to be enough to compete with the other programs in the SEC. Most likely that's true. So we'll see if the $120 million that Jacksonville spends is enough to compete with London, the little city across the pond. So we'll see how it plays out. But I just wanted to do a quick update because we've got that $120 million deal. We're supposed to hear soon on the shipyard, which is the larger real estate deal. We'll check back in when we get some detail on that and when we see where that vote ends up. And then we'll also keep an eye on London. Of course, they've got a practice facility over there. We'll see if there's any more developments on that front. Of course, with the COVID, that's affected a lot. And of course, Jacksonville going to London became more difficult. But post-COVID, most likely that will pick back up. We'll see where all of that stands moving forward. For now, enjoy football season. It is absolutely upon us. And thanks. Have a good day.